Hi folks, welcome back. I hope you're all doing well. Today I want to talk a little bit about Emacs. I've been using Emacs for more than 2 decades. I'd used it off and on, but then I really got serious somewhere around the early 2000s. So why do I like it? Why have I stuck with it after all these years? Why do I think it's so great? So first of all, I don't think editor is even the right category for Emacs. Emacs gets into all these editor wars, Emacs versus VI versus Visual Studio Code and whatnot. But Emacs is much, much more than just an editor. Now, there's many other people that have made in-depth videos about how Emacs is the tool of a lifetime, an editor of a lifetime. It's one of those things that you really shape to your particular workflows over years and decades, and it becomes like this old, well-worn piece of clothing. So the first thing I love about Emacs is that it has a couple of very unifying concepts that are consistently applied throughout the entire program. So the first concept, of course, is that everything is text and all that text is always in a buffer. And philosophically, this is similar to many other great long-lived systems. You've had Unix, of course, where the unifying idea behind Unix was that everything is a file and a file is simply a sequence of bytes. If you look at some other very influential systems from the same time, things like Smalltalk or Oberon, you'll find similar philosophical threads there in that they took one idea and applied it uniformly, consistently throughout the system. For example, with Smalltalk, the unifying idea was that everything is an object. So with Emacs, you have this uniform noun that everything is text and text is contained in a buffer. And then once you have that noun, you can bring to bear many, many verbs or actions upon that noun. And the way Emacs does it, of course, is with Emacs Lisp. And that is the second deep unifying idea of Emacs, which is that you have a language runtime, a full-blown language runtime. In fact, all of Emacs is architected around the runtime and not the other way around. And that is very different from pretty much every editor out there, because a lot of people make the mistake of treating Emacs Lisp or treating the way you configure other editors as knobs and dials. So you view it as configuration. And I think in the Emacs world, you view it as something else. You don't view it as configuration, you view it as extension. So with the Emacs philosophy, when you're trying to write some Emacs Lisp to change the way the editor behaves, it's not like you're changing a set of predefined knobs and dials. You're actually extending the entire environment. You're scripting it to be more in line with what you want. So it's extension, it's not configuration. With things like VS Code or many other editors, what you're doing really is configuration. The editor exposes a predefined set of knobs and dials. And that list of knobs and dials might be really large, but you still have only those to work with. And this really lets Emacs become the one-stop cockpit for a lot of the work you do on your computer, especially if you're a programmer, because everything is text. Your code, of course, is text, but then so is your terminal. So, for example, I don't really use terminals at all. I totally don't get all the excitement about all these new terminals because I pretty much just fire up Emacs and then all my shells live inside Emacs. And once you get used to that idea, it becomes very hard to go back to a traditional terminal because the entirety of the text in the terminal is not available to you for copying or editing or searching. You can only edit the current command line in the terminal, and that just seems very restrictive once you get used to operating a terminal inside Emacs. That's just one example. You can take directory listings as another example. So you can dered a directory and you can change things in it. You can change file names, you can change permissions, etc. Because after all, it's just text. Why should you not be able to do that? So once you start using Emacs in that way, you realize that since everything is just text and Emacs has this giant set of verbs and actions that you can bring to bear for manipulating text, it's just very comfortable to do everything inside Emacs. Now, I wish I could do that. I don't spend all my time on a computer inside Emacs. I use a browser. I do sometimes also use VS Code. And that brings me to what's the future trajectory of Emacs. Now, in the last few years, the last 5 to 6 years, there's been a huge resurgence in activity around Emacs, especially around the version 29 and version 30 releases when they had native compilation, really big resurgence in some very nice packages that make usage of Emacs much nicer. So that's been great to see how Emacs has had this explosion in enthusiasm and usage in the last few years. And I think I'll continue using it for many, many years or decades to come. So what could change that? I think there are a few things which pull me outside Emacs. The biggest one is bespoke built-in functionality with IDEs. It's still really fiddly to get Emacs to behave as well as, say, a JetBrains IDE that has really in-depth language-specific functionality. And that's getting better with things like LSP, because then you can offload a lot of that language to the LSP server rather than have to implement bespoke logic in the editor or in Emacs itself. The other thing that pulls me away from Emacs these days is I use things like Copilot, all the AI completion stuff a lot. And the way all that stuff is integrated with their home IDs, so to speak. For example, GitHub Copilot has really deep integration with VS Code because they're both from Microsoft. And that makes for a very compelling flow to have your AI code assistant and the code and version control all wrapped up in one neat package. And that kind of bespoke interaction model, I'm sure is theoretically possible to implement in Emacs, but it's a lot of work. And also it's moving very fast. And those parties, GitHub and VS Code, have an advantage because they're using their own first-party APIs for all that integration. So there isn't any open API that would make it easy for people to bring native Copilot-like functionality within other editors. So those are some of the things that still pull me outside Emacs. But otherwise, Emacs really is the kind of central environment via which I use my computer. Other than the browser, I guess. It's mostly the browser and Emacs. So that was my little riff on Emacs, my editor of a lifetime. I've written about some of these things in blog posts over the years. I'll leave links to all that down below. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. If you like content like this, consider subscribing, like the video, and I will see you next time. Thank you very much.